Welcome to what is the final in our series of workshops around developing agile sprints. Today's session is about leading and managing an agile sprint. I'll do introductions to the speakers in a minute, but just a sort of reminder, we've got an hour together. And by the end of this workshop, hopefully you will have sort of gained some additional knowledge and ideas around some of the key issues in leading and managing an agile sprint, including building your team, so recruitment, issues, and really thinking about what skills do you need and how do you fill any gaps. Thinking about how do you start well, how do you develop a positive research culture for everybody within your team, and also between the team and the key partners and stakeholders, ensuring that you've got a shared sense of purpose and a clear process by which you're going to collaborate throughout the sprint and ensure that everybody's has a voice and has opportunities to develop during the sprint too. We're going to try and give you some tips and hints about developing a realistic work package, which is possibly one of the most challenging issues in a sprint that we've identified to date. Thinking about how do you both ensure that the work package can deliver the research, but also how do you bring together the different interdisciplinary components, and how do you also make sure that there is time for the research team to develop as well. And then just sort of also cover issues around, the support that's available and who do you talk to when it comes to some of the more administrative and operational aspects of the sprint. Okay, so just sort of quickly to introduce the facilitators of this session. So I think quite a lot of you have been on a number of these workshops, so you've met me a few times, but I slightly change my profile each time depending upon what I'm talking about. So I'm Rachel Hayman. I'm the Agile Program Manager. My career has spanned academia, policy and practice, and over that career so far I have designed, managed and contributed to a large number of projects and programs within the research space, but also very much in the applied space as well, as a researcher, a practitioner and a consultant. Projects that have spanned the globe, quite frankly. So I'm bringing a lot of that knowledge and experience into the session today and into the support that I provide to all of the Agile sprints in general. And Aidong, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Aidong. I'm a professor in Department of Engineering Science. I'm a chemical engineer by training and also a mathematical modeler. So we work in a number of areas which are quite closely related to environmental sustainability, primarily from kind of engineering perspective or engineering systems perspective. And within Agile, I think as you can see on the screen, so I was co-leading one of the early sprints. I guess I will have some time to show some more details about that, but I think that's me.
Right. What are we focusing on in this final workshop in our series? So we have, this is the final in our series, and we're really focusing on how do you lead and manage an agile sprint, recognizing that lots of you may have been involved in many different projects, research projects to date, might have lots of experience, but what we're really trying to focus in on is what might be different to other research projects that you've led or that you've been involved in already. And I have to say that in my experience, every single time I get involved in a project or program, something new jumps up and hits me. So there's always something that you've got to tweak and change and adjust in your approaches. So I think that you will find that agile research projects are a bit like that. As I said, this is the sort of last in our series, and this hopefully kind of brings together some of the issues that we focused on in the other sessions to date. Just a reminder, we've looked at theory of change in an agile sprint. We've looked at EDI and how to develop an equality impact assessment. We've looked at co-creation and how do we work with stakeholders to develop sprints, but also working with them all the way through the sprint. And we've also talked about interdisciplinarity and what does that mean in practice in an agile sprint. So this this final seminar is sort of aimed to try and bring some of that together and just really think about some of the issues around leading and managing a sprint. As I say, there might be many of you with lots of experience, but we're also within the Agile Initiative really trying to encourage leadership by earlier career researchers who may have less experience in managing a complicated project like this. And so this is also aimed at trying to sort of help those earlier career researchers in that process. But so the first thing that I want to say is to sort of bring in that reminder from the very start of the series about where your sprint sits within the wider umbrella of the Agile Initiative, because this is an important part also of the process of designing the sprint and really thinking about what do you have to do with the team to manage it all the way through, because it's not just about you delivering a project, us giving you a grant that you're then going to use to deliver your research project. You're also part of this bigger Agile Initiative, and we need you as sprint leads to think about how you're contributing to that bigger goal all the way through. So it's just a reminder that you play that key role in helping us to achieve the 3 goals. The obvious one being the sprint, the research, delivering that solution-oriented science. But those other 2 goals are very important. It's about how do we create a cohort of interdisciplinary researchers who are skilled in designing and delivering this type of rapid interdisciplinary solutions oriented research. And that's a really key part of the whole initiative, is gaining those skills, developing those skills, and really helping to think about what does it take for that to be done, particularly when you're working in a complex institution and we have to sort of factor in all these different component parts, really thinking about the obstacles, the opportunities, that sort of stuff. And then finally, the 3rd goal around contributing to a research culture shift that actually enables this type of research to happen, and helping us as a broader program team to really identify both the obstacles and the enablers so that we can bring that learning to bear on the institution and the funding system, so that this type of research becomes easier to develop. So you're not going to hear too much from me until later on in the session. What we're really going to focus on in this workshop is to hear from Aidong about his experience of leading a sprint and giving you the opportunity to ask questions. So we're going to hear from Aidong now, and then I will sort of broaden it out a little bit at the end to some of the more broader principles and ideas that we want to really get across as we move forward. So I'm going to hand over to Aidong, who's going to tell us all about what it was like to lead Sprint 2.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. I'm very delighted to have the opportunity to share with everybody what we have gone through. Yeah, so maybe I can just start by just giving a very quick overview of what this sprint is called. Sprint 2, I think, is one of the first 5 sprints, the first 5 guinea pigs, so to speak, kind of experiments of this agile model. So as you can see roughly on the screen, the topic was about addressing a regional problem, not global problem. But it's focused on the nutrients flows. By nutrient, basically we meant things like nitrogen, phosphorus, which are important for food production or maybe for the broader bioeconomy. But on the other hand, they are sources of environmental problems as well if we don't manage them properly. The goal of this sprint was to have a focus on this particular region. I think we have chosen Leicestershire County and including Leicester City as the region that we focused on, and just trying to understand what's happening there and to develop a hopefully a good strategy for the future actions. And at the beginning, we did think about, if we have time, whether we should look at one or two other regions so that we can generalize the learnings. I will come back to this point later on. But in terms of the policy pool, as many of you already know by now, that many or probably all the sprints in Agile, at least in the first round, they were supposed to have a very clear policy pool. For this particular sprint, I think one of the things that was driving the shaping of the sprint was when we were putting together the ideas, the environment bill was being developed. That was quite a couple of years ago now. Part of it was to say that across England, the weekly a separate collection of food waste will become mandatory for the local authorities in England. So now some of you might know the Environment Bill has become Environment Act. It becomes a law. I think when we were looking at these, I think the idea was that this weekly mandatory separate collection of food waste was to start sometime in 2023. I understand this timeline has been shifted a little bit because I think a lot of regions were not really ready for that, but it is still very much kind of a requirement to happen in the next couple of years. So that was one of the key drivers. And then more broadly, we were discussing with people primarily from DEFRA. We had a chance to talk to multiple teams there. And from the discussions, it became clear that nutrients seems to be one of the areas which touch upon multiple policy areas. And I think there was a document called 25-year plan for the environment. And if you read that document, multiple chapters, one way or another, talked about nutrients, either from resource perspective or from environmental impact perspective. I think there was a clear demand for us to develop a better understanding of what's happening and also how to make improvement. So these things were in our mind at the beginning, and when we started doing the work, and then there was a war in Ukraine, and there was a lot of discussion around food security and particularly the supply of fertilizers. There was a huge volatility in the fertilizer market. And then I think, and that has shaped a lot of thinking when we were doing the work. So in terms of research, yeah, as I said, basically two things. We tried to map the current system. There's a little bit of diagram out there, but it might be hard to read. But just to understand, how nutrients are introduced into the region, how nutrients are going through the local economy, where they end up with. It's a kind of mapping. And the second aspect is really try to develop a strategy for improvement, either from resource perspective or from environmental perspective. So this is a collaboration primarily between engineering department in Oxford and ECI. So the whole project was co-led by myself and Professor John Ingram from ECI, supported by a few other colleagues in engineering and geography. We also had support from a colleague working on, I think he has got a geochemist background from Lancaster. So it's quite an interdisciplinary effort. Stakeholders, the Leicestershire County Council was our main stakeholder because they were the local authorities there. They were very keen to co-develop the project and also the output together with us. At the national level, it was mainly DEFRA, and we were further supported by a few other stakeholders. So that's a brief summary of what the sprint is about. But I guess Rachel really asked me to highlight our learning either in terms of experience or lessons in a few areas. I think the first one Rachel asked me to talk about is what is special with a sprint compared to conventional research projects. I think in my career, I was more familiar with projects running, say, 2 or 3 years. I think typically 3 years, I would say. And now we're talking about a 12-month sprint. So what is really special about a sprint? I think from our reflections, I would mention 3 things listed on the screen here. The first one, not surprisingly, is really about the intensity of research, right? So to be honest, at the very beginning of this 12-month journey, we were not quite sure, where we would end up with, because we don't really understand, we don't quite see exactly how we can, get all the work packages delivered, the tasks completed. So we were kind of learning by doing, but I think as a way of just reflecting what we have done, I think compared to a normal research where the pace is very different. In the sprint, I think we the intensity is nothing familiar to people who have been mainly involved in the conventional research. And that means that when we talk about teamwork, this is not just a conceptual thing. So literally, I think I have a little bit more details later on, but literally we had to meet every week, involving most of the researchers and constantly discussing, where we are, what is the gap in the data, who should we be talking to, and what is the next step. So so these things were really happening on a daily basis. And this also means that although in different work packages, there is kind of logical order, and within each work package, there were multiple tasks. But in most cases, we're kind of getting our hands full, right? Without having to be very clear about, hey, which step we're in, because we're more working not as a linear path, but rather as a kind of parallelized network of tasks. I think that was not by design. That was simply driven by the time pressure in many cases, but also kind of constant reflection of where we are and how we can get things faster. And I think that takes me to the second point, because in 12 months and in a policy-driven and user-driven project, it was very hard to separate, quiet research time with stakeholders engagement. I think in these, say, typical 3-year research project that I was involved in the past, I think typically we have a kickoff meeting inviting a bunch of stakeholders coming in to give a nice talk. And then maybe in the middle, we invite a few people coming in to do the, midterm review. And then at the end, we have a wrap-up kind of dissemination event. I think that is normal pace for stakeholder engagement in a kind of 3-year project. But in this sprint, that is certainly not what we did. I think we had a plan of a number of workshops. Every workshop has got clearly defined meaning. And it's not just about us telling other people, what we have done. In many cases, those workshops became important kind of source of information. And also to get steering from the stakeholders and to really allow us to focus on what is to come next. So I'm going to have a little bit more details on this, but I think the intensity, the pace of stakeholder engagement was very, very different as well. And finally, this sounds might be a little bit trivial, but it's about, hey, you're busy in 12 months, you try to answer the questions, defined or co-developed with the stakeholders, but what will be the kind of tangible outputs at the end? Again, if we refer to the conventional research projects, we will be basically talking about journal papers, conference papers, right? But I think for this particular sprint, I have to, in terms of journal paper, we are still trying to draft our very first journal paper. We are a few months away from the end day of the sprint. And if you ask, what actually we managed to produce, I think the major piece we managed to produce was a relatively comprehensive report not necessarily for the academic audience, but rather for policymakers or for people in industry, or people in the general public, so to speak. And the way how we shaped that report was basically corresponding to the initial policy needs we identified without thinking too much about whether this looks like an academic paper or not. So and in the process, because the main researchers are, I think they are, most of them are early career researchers, maybe 1 or 2 years into postdoc, and of course they have got the desire to publish for moving forward, but gradually we did realize for a sprint, it's probably not very realistic to expect that you got all the kind of academic papers out by the end of the 12 months, because you simply don't have to do that. But on the other hand, we do recognize some of the outputs in a kind of non-conventional form, not only in terms of project report, but so for example, some of the workshops, we use them to gather information, to get feedback from the stakeholders. But sometimes we realized, I give you just one example. I think in one of the workshops that took place in the county council site, and some people just look around the table and suddenly realize, hey, this regional nutrient management problem is really very, very important, and that requires people from industry, from government, from local government, from national government, from the general public, et cetera. But looking at the table, and I think that person said, this is the very first time this group of people had the opportunity to sit together. And we thought, okay, this might be a kind of output from a sprint that it's very different from a journal paper, but we realized that is nevertheless something very useful for the real world. I think realizing that there will be different types of outputs, I think that also marks a difference between a sprint and more conventional projects. So I will probably move on. Yeah. So in terms of the other thing Rachel asked me to reflect on was the aspect of work planning. As I mentioned earlier, 12 months is super fast. So what you can see on the screen is a rather typical work package structures. I think I guess all other sprints also had work package based structures as well. The one that is shown on the screen is the original one we had. So we started with the work package 1 is kind of the case study, work package 2 and 3, 4. These are the data gathering, mathematical modeling exercises, and work package 5 was for looking at opportunities of building on the learning from the Leicestershire County case study and trying to apply these to some other areas. So that is what we imagined at the beginning. Very quickly, I think it's around kind of mid-term review stage. We started to realize just this Leicestershire County or Leicester City, this particular regional case study alone will probably occupy all, most or if not all the time. It was probably just too ambitious, trying to do maybe 1 or 2 other locations. We started talking to people in Birmingham City, and I think, but we had a couple of meetings, but then we just realized, it's better that we try to do a good job on this main case study, and basically we dropped work package 5. I think somehow halfway through. So I think that is what I mean by being realistic, as one of the bullet points shown there. And the other one is that we also felt we had to be rather flexible, particularly if we wish to take the input from stakeholders more seriously. I'll give you just one example. In work package 4, so it's called optimal design. The original thinking was to use one of the optimization models that we developed for some other purposes, and we try to adapt it and use it for this particular purpose. And when we talk to people in the county council, and they say, okay, this can be interesting, but maybe too generic. But we had some thoughts in mind. They started to mention, can we look at this option or that option? I think one particular idea they put forward was, so instead of trying to redesign the whole system, which is probably not very realistic, can we try to look at to what extent we can reuse some of these existing bioprocessing capacities? I think particularly for anaerobic digestion, some of the people in this audience might know about anaerobic digestion. And we were together looking at the map. I think it's a bit difficult to see to read the one on the screen. It shows there's a database out there showing in different parts of this region what are the existing anaerobic digestion plants, what are the types, the capacity, the year of build, et cetera. And so the one gentleman from the county team said, can we look at how we can just make a better use of these existing facilities and how we can channel the food waste collected into these facilities, particularly some of the facilities currently used only by farmers to deal with farming residues. So that is not something we planned, but we thought that was very meaningful suggestion and also give very tangible output that can be really used by the local authority in the future. So we dropped the idea of doing a very generic optimization kind of thing and then completed this particular piece of optimization task. So yeah, that is what I mean by be flexible. I think we can move on, Rachel. Yeah, so the just a little bit of reflection on the interdisciplinary research and particular teamwork. I mentioned already earlier about the intensity of research, because I think the within the 12 months we needed to do data gathering, mathematical modeling, talking to stakeholders. There are many different aspects of the work which needed to happen at a very fast pace. So I think we were kind of overwhelmed at the beginning, I would say, but then gradually we felt one thing that really helped a lot. That is the response bullet point I mentioned there. So I forgot how this started. Was that by kind of organic self-organization, or we had some wisdom from somebody? So the researchers, the postdocs from engineering and from ECI, they started to say, hey, you know what? Every Friday, we need to sit together 3 hours. And we need to bring in, all our laptops and, going through what has happened last week and get some kind of research work done within these 3 hours and also be very clear who is going to do what in the next week. So that happened on a weekly basis. Sometimes I was there because I happened to be on sabbatical leave in that year. I didn't have a lot of teaching, so I was able to participate in some of the sessions. But I think these sessions were really critical, and that really helped us to get the main results in place by the time they needed to be produced. Yeah, I think unfortunately we didn't really capture any photos, but but you can see the team out there. A little bit of reflection on the more practical aspect. I think one of the key challenges we had is really about recruitment. This is again a key difference from a 3-year project, because we didn't really have a lot of time to get the postdoc in place. There are problems with HR procedures, visas, and so there were a few postdocs who were supposed to start on the same day, but that never happened. So there were kind of 1 or 2 months difference between their start dates. So we had to try very hard to accommodate this reality. And And another thing to mention is that I think it's about capacity building, it's about maintaining the group, and also about developing the researchers. I think these things are kind of mixed together, I would say. Because all the postdocs, they're working on the sprint, they're quite interested in the research, but they have got next steps, right? And we, I think there were 1 or 2 cases we had to manage the early departure, which is hard within a 12-month project. But on the other hand, I guess, they are the younger generations. I think in the audience are also a lot of people from the younger generations, but I'm rather speaking to colleagues, or maybe as old as me, to say that even within just 12 months, and they are just temporarily within the team. So we felt it was really necessary to give them the best support for the next step. So I personally spent a lot of time, preparing them for their next job interviews, because I think on the one hand, we are interested in getting the work done within the sprint, but on the other hand, the young researchers have got their own next steps. I just felt we had the duty to help them. Next slide. Yeah, just a few other random things. I think when the sprint team reported back to the Agile engine room, so we were asked, how you guys were able to manage to get a lot of things done within a short period of time. I think one of the things that everybody mentioned is that I think the existing ties were very important. So within the academic team, so I have worked with John Ingram on a few other things in the past few years that really helped. But also, so John has got existing working relationship with Leicestershire County Council. That also helped a lot. I think otherwise, if you start the academic team or the engagement with stakeholders from the scratch, I think that could be very challenging. And I mentioned the academic team, the stakeholders, but I think what also helped us a lot was we had a consultancy firm to undertake part of the business aspect of the work, because they have got their existing network, right? And it would take us very long time to establish that by ourselves, and we were not able to do the same the job to the same level as they did. I think that was really, really very important. In terms of stakeholder engagement, I mentioned, people from the county council, from DEFRA, they were all very supportive, but on the other hand, they all got their day jobs. That means we had to be really very flexible. We needed to be persistent, but also need to be very flexible in terms of when to meet up, where, how, online, in person, with a larger group or a smaller group. Do we have to repeat the same thing, multiple times with a different audience? I think there was a lot of kind of dynamic adjustment. So I guess the message there is that, to be persistent, but also to be flexible. The other thing I would say briefly is the because of the short duration of a sprint, it's very hard to organize a large scale engagement, because that normally take a quite long lead time. So if anybody thinking of having a workshop with 40 or 40 plus people, you got to start very, very early, because otherwise you're not going to get this done in time. A few other things very briefly. I think we had difficulty with signing a kind of NDA with one of the water companies. I think at the end we took a shortcut. I don't want to get into what I mean by a shortcut, but when it comes to NDAs, these kind of things, 12 months doesn't work with the idea of proper NDAs. So if this may become part of your sprint or future sprint, you need to think about it and think of the best way of getting this addressed. And another thing to mention is the the wrap-up phase. I think 12 months or 12 months was mainly spent on doing the research, collecting data, modeling, running workshops. But at the end of the day, we need to write things up one way or another. I think as a sprint lead, I struggled a little bit to identify the researchers to help with this, because by the time some of them left early and some of them left at the end of the sprint, moving on to another very busy job. So if I knew this, I would have started earlier. Trying to pin down specific people, earlier on, not until the last month. I think that might be kind of one of the lessons we learned. Yeah, we're talking about conventional, non-conventional outputs. As I said, we are still trying to put together the very first journal paper that is 6 months after the sprint. And for anybody who wants to, who think that a journal conventional publication is very, very important, auto sprint, early planning is really important. I think that's everything from me. Yeah, I mean, just very briefly summarize. So what we enjoyed most, as I said, it's amazing to get so many things done within 12 months, and knowing that this is relevant to the real world. I think one of these pictures you can see is a kind of a material flow analysis. I don't suppose everybody can read the numbers, but that is one of the main outputs. We thought in a normal product, we probably take 2 years to get this out, but with a sprint, we were able to get this out rather quickly. And as a proof that we enjoy the work, you can see a picture of a Christmas lunch. But what really worked well, I think, as I mentioned, existing ties were important. Regular, frequent co-working sessions. I think this really worked very well to us, and the in-depth interactions with stakeholders, really getting what they are concerned with, and also their brilliant ideas. Yes, I mean, what could have been done better, as I just mentioned, the how to put a team together timely, how to maintain the team through the 12 months, the wrap-up planning, and also think about the output. I think that's everything from me, Rachel.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Aidong. So I just very quickly want to at least introduce another slide to you before we close the webinar, because it's just, trying to bring together all of what we've heard. Aidong's experience is extremely typical of sprints. I mean, not completely, everything's been a bit different, but very common themes have come through around holding a team together, enabling everybody to thrive while keeping an eye on the goal, right? It is a difficult thing to do, but we're hoping it's a really positive experience. And if you can build on the learning that we've got so far, we really hope that we can make future sprints sharper, better, brilliant, etc., and really enabling people to get the most out of it. So so when you're planning for your sprint, just I break it down into pieces. So if you think about the sprint in this timeline, there's a moment there's a lot that happens before you even get your award. The design, the engagement, the putting it all together. You've got the moment with the sprint, and then you've got what happens afterwards. So that sort of, I think timeline is a brilliant way to think about it personally. There are things you need to think about before you even start. The research design, building a team, the co-creation, the budget planning, talking to your department, talking to HR, preparing your equality impact assessment, all those bits and pieces. We can share these slides immediately afterwards, just so you've got it. But there are things that happen before, because you have to get your proposal fully developed, over the line, funded before you get that go ahead to start. There's lots that has to be thought about during implementation. So, once you've actually started, as Aidong said, the NDA, we've hit problems with sprints where they didn't get the ethics approval for ages into the sprint. So really thinking ahead, am I going to need that? Making sure we've thought about it. So there's all sorts of things that are going on that as a lead, as a manager, you've got to be holding all of this together. And ideally, you're sharing that across your team, because this is the horizontal way of working, where you've got very early career researchers and senior researchers working together to tackle all the elements of the project. Has been something that's been quite exciting in many of the sprints. So you're thinking about doing the research, but you're also having to think about team building and cohesion, career development. Really important, as Aidong says, to be supporting those early career researchers. If you're an early career researcher yourself, leading a sprint, you've got to build in time for your career development, mentoring, learning the skills that it takes to do this. That's, it's really an important part. So just making time for that, really important. You've got to manage a budget. There's monitoring and reporting to be done. And of course, there's dealing with the unknown. So that's happening. And then as you're coming towards the end of your sprint, as Aidong says, you've got to plan for the end. You've got to be really thinking but from the start, not at the end, but from the start, plan for the end. What's it going to look like? What will those final outputs be? What about workshops, final reporting, etc.? And then there's the bit that happens afterwards, beyond the sprint, how are you going to cope with the further outputs, impact monitoring, all of that. And particularly, if this is being led by researchers who are on short-term contracts, how do we factor that into the thinking as well? So, lots for us to do. Bottom line is, it's not simple, it's not linear, it's going to be messy. Be prepared to adapt, to pivot, and be creative. But help is at hand. That's the last message, and then I'll let you go. We are here, the Agile Engine Room and your departmental administrators, we're here to help you with budgets, with HR, permissions, project planning, you name it. We want sprints to be successful and we want them to be impactful. And we also want them to offer a great experience for researchers and partners. They offer great opportunities to do research differently, to have a different type of impact from conventional research. So we want them to work, and we're here to help you do that. So it's 2 o'clock. We got there. I know you might have had lots of other questions and things like that. Do feel free to pose questions to us, whether you're developing a sprint right now, whether you're thinking about being part of a sprint in the future, whether you're at a different institution and you're thinking about how could I apply this in my own research, how could I apply this within my institution, get in touch with us. And we will respond. So thank you, Aidong, for sharing your experience. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this webinar, but also all the other webinars that we've had. And stay in touch, and we wish you all the very best.